Although the video I'm going to respond to is not particularly new, it's a good example of how wrong-headed young Earth creationism can be. The fact that people have paid good money to watch this on DVD boggles my mind. So hold on to your hats and try not to facepalm as much as I did when I first watched this offering by Kyle Butt. Before we get started, I would like to note that the title of his video indicates that doubt is a bad thing. I would like to point out that false certainty is a lot worse. Anyhow, take it away, Mr. Butt.
When Adam was 2 seconds old, how old did Adam look? 25? 30? 35? But he was only 2 seconds old. He was placed in the Garden of Eden, and it was full of trees that could produce fruit almost immediately after they were created.
As you can see, Mr. Butt is automatically assuming that his literal interpretation of Genesis is the only correct one. No room for poetic language or allegory here.
If you had the opportunity to cut down a tree in the Garden of Eden,
assuming, of course, that there really was a literal Garden of Eden,
and you counted the rings of that tree, how many rings would that tree have? 100? 200? 300? Who knows? But that tree would most likely look much older than 2 seconds old or 3 days old. How old would that tree be? Oh, that tree would be 3 days old, but it would look much older.
So in order to be a young Earth creationist, we need to assume that once upon a time mature trees were literally magically poofed into existence, rather than the understanding that we currently have that trees only ever grow from seeds or cuttings.
There is an idea called the idea of apparent age. And that suggests to us that when God created everything, He created things in a very mature state. Adam was old enough to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. The fruit trees were old enough to bear fruit.
All stated as if it were established beyond any reasonable doubt. This brand of religionist irritates me, because they don't honestly describe what they believe. They assert it as if it were all factually true.
How old is the earth? You know, there are not many things that the creationist and the evolutionist agree on. In fact, there are very, very few. But one of the things upon which both the creationist and evolutionist agree is this. In order for evolution to have occurred, the earth must be multiplied billions of years old. That's what everybody agrees on. Is it the case that the earth is multiplied billions of years old? That's the time that you need for evolution to happen.
Yes, indeed. Evolution requires long periods of time for major changes to occur. However, I feel the need to insert a little context here, because multiplied billions is kind of vague. So far as we know, life first appeared on this planet about 3.8 billion years ago, but it did not diversify into complex multicellular organisms until about 500 million years ago, 500 and something million. Creationists, like Mr. Butt, rarely represent the science accurately.
Did you know that there are over 75 different ways to date the earth? And over half of them give an age for the earth in just a few thousand or maybe just a few million years. Some of them give an age for the earth in just a few hundred years. And we know those aren't accurate, but they are all based on assumptions that are used by evolutionists.
Wow, 75 different dating methods? That's a very specific claim, with a stunning lack of detail. I also need to point out that evolutionists don't deal specifically with the age of the Earth. Evolution deals with the biological diversity of life. The scientists who figured out the age of the Earth are called geologists, Mr. Butt.
You see, the evolutionist says, well, we can look at the earth and we can see that it's multiplied millions of years old. It just looks so old.
Oh, come on. People who argue that the Earth is old usually have reasons to back it up.
It looks so old compared to what? How would you know what a young earth looked like? And how old did the earth look when it was created just 2 seconds after its creation? Those are all very good questions.
They're not very good questions if they assume that the earth was created, without demonstrating that it could not have come into being via some natural process. It's a lot harder to figure something out if you don't assume your conclusions at the outset, but there's a greater chance that you will arrive at a correct conclusion.
But the evolutionist says, well, we can prove the earth is multiplied millions or billions of years old. We have all of these dating methods, and we can date the rocks, and we can date those fossils by those rocks, and we can prove that the earth is millions of years old, and it gives us plenty of time for evolution. I'm sorry, but you cannot. The evolutionist cannot prove the earth is multiplied millions of years old. And I'm going to show you several reasons why.
Okay, let's hear it then, Mr. Butt.
Does it surprise you that according to the evolutionary time frame, that the age of the earth in the universe doubles about every 20 to 40 years?
Doubles every 20 to 40 years? Really?
You see, when Charles Darwin came out with his idea in 1859 of evolution, people looked at the earth and they said, oh, it must be maybe somewhere around 200 million years old. And they would suggest that they had dating methods that prove that. And from 1859 until now, we have increased that from 200 million years or so to 4.6 billion years.
Geologists and other scientists have been estimating the age of the Earth since before Darwin. As technology has improved, so has the accuracy of the age estimates.
And all along the way, evolutionists have said, well, we've got a dating method that proves this number, and we've got a dating method that proves that number, and now we've got a dating method that proves 4.6 billion, supposedly. When it doubles to 9.2 billion, are we going to have dating methods that supposedly prove that the earth is 9.2 billion years old? Oh, I'm sure there will be some.
This is ridiculous. Scientists have known that the earth is about 4.6 billion years old since the 1950s. That's 60 years between you and me, Mr. Butt.
But...
Yes?
But...
Yes?
But...
Get on with it.
But... what will that say about all the dating methods that they have suggested that prove the other dates? Well, it would suggest that all of those were false dating methods.
Not necessarily. Scientific dating methods give estimates which usually indicate a minimum or maximum age. For example, dendrochronologists who study tree growth rings have an unbroken record which demonstrates that trees have been doing their thing for at least 11,000 years. That's 5,000 years older than Mr. Butt thinks the Earth and the entire universe is.
And that's what I think we can show in this particular lesson. Like I said, 75 different ways to date the Earth, many of them giving us a young age for the Earth.
The unanswered question here is whether all of these unspecified dating methods would withstand scientific scrutiny.
Let's just look at one of those ideas. Henry Morris from the Creation Research Institute, or the Institute for Creation Research, ICR, has suggested to us an idea known as population statistics.
Okay, so are we going to hear about birth rates, death rates, diseases, famines, modern medicines and technology?
Population statistics are simply dealing with how long humans have been on the earth.
Oh, silly me. I thought there was more to it than that.
Supposedly, humans in one shape, form, or fashion, according to the evolutionary time frame, have been on the earth for about 3 to 5 million years.
You what? Humans? Mr. Butt, why are you teaching your paying followers such inaccurate information about science? Humans have been around for less than 250,000 years. That's Homo sapiens, like you and me. Before that, our earlier ancestors were still hominids and apes, but we wouldn't describe them as humans. We share a common ancestor with our closest living relatives of a different species, the chimpanzees, about 6 or 7 million years ago. This relationship was figured out in Darwin's time, many decades before anyone knew what a gene was. Since then, the study of genetics has confirmed the reality of that hypothesis, that we really are distant cousins.
Now, we're going to be very conservative, and we're going to say that humans have been on the earth only for about 1 million years, according to the evolutionary time frame. And we're going to suppose that a generation, the time that a new generation appears, is about 42 years.
Okay, so far, both of those estimates are highly questionable. Ironically, they're both too high. Most women have children before they are 42. Therefore, the time between generations is more likely to be in the low 20s. We don't have to go far back in history to get to a time when the average human lifespan was 42 years. Surely a young Earth creationist wouldn't confuse lifespan with generation length, would they?
And we're going to be very, very conservative and say there is a population growth rate of only 2.4. 2.4 is a tiny growth rate. That's that each pair of people have 2.4 children. They would have to have 2 to keep the population the same. The 0.4 is a tiny increase.
Oh boy. The real figure for zero population growth is more like 2.1. And since when did human societies neatly divide into pairs who all had children? What about all those who didn't or couldn't reproduce? But hey, let's see where this is going.
Do you know that if people had been on the earth for just 1 million years, with a generation being 42 years and a growth rate of 2.4%, or 2.4 children, that now, even counting wars and famines and plagues and pestilences, there would be 1 times 10 to the 5,000th people in the universe? On the earth, rather. Do you know how many people that the entire universe could hold?
This is ridiculous. Who, apart from young Earth creationists who like to erect straw men, is proposing that human population growth rates have remained the same, even within recorded history? Look at this graph, Mr. Butt, and try to learn something new.
The entire universe, at 20 billion light years estimation, could only hold 1 times 10 to the 100 people if you packed a person in every single part of the universe.
Let me stop you there for a second, Mr. Butt. You just said that the universe is 20 billion light years across. That's an estimate, at least within the ballpark of current scientific estimates. The most recent estimates are about 4 times that. But it gets complicated due to what we can see now and the continuing expansion of the universe. But the thing is that we can see galaxies which are billions of light years away from us. Given the fact that light travels at only 186,000 miles per second, how is it that we can see them at all? If the universe really was only 6,000 years old, we shouldn't even be able to see 1/10 the way across our own galaxy. As for the idea that a so-called evolutionary timescale would equate to a human population more than filling up the universe with biomass, I'm not even going to dignify that with anything more than ridicule.
And yet, we are supposed to believe that humans have been here for 3 to 5 million years?
No, Mr. Butt, you're not supposed to believe anything. You're supposed to put more effort into understanding the science properly, especially if you're charging people to watch this stuff.
Did you know if you put humans on this earth about 6,000 years ago, and you keep those same parameters with the generation at 42 years, with the 2.4 children growth rate, that you get a number of about 4.34 billion, very close to our 6 billion? Well, how is that?
That's because Dr. Morris assumed his conclusion before he plugged in his made-up numbers. It's also worth noting that in the 8 years since the video I'm responding to was recorded, the global human population has grown to 7.3 billion. But that's another topic.
How is it that we can show humans have not been on this earth for multiplied millions of years, even for 3 or 4, even for 1 million, but only they have been here for just a few thousand?
Mr. Butt, you haven't shown anything apart from your ignorance of science, population dynamics and statistical analysis. I hope that there are young Earth creationists watching this. If you are one, you need to know that this guy, and others like him, are selling you a bunch of crap, to put it politely. For the record, I'm not making an argument for atheism. I'm promoting scientific literacy. Don't let snake oil salesmen persuade you that evolution and atheism are the same thing. Do what the Kyle Butts of this world don't encourage you to do. Research widely and fact-check the claims being made, including anything you hear from me.
Let's look at something else. The evolutionists would suggest to us that when you look at the geological column, when you go to something like the Grand Canyon and you see all of those different layers, those layers were laid down over millions of years.
That's more or less right, apart from one important detail. Evolutionists are not geologists. Evolutionary biologists study living organisms, not rocks. Paleontologists, on the other hand, study fossilized organisms in rocks. These are fairly basic details which will help my creationist friends to be more knowledgeable than Mr. Butt apparently is.
Those layers were laid down over millions of years.
It's not as simple as that. Sedimentary rocks form at different rates. Geologists know that. This can be figured out from the composition and grain size within the rocks in question. Deposition rates vary widely too, but geologists understand this and take it into account.
Under an idea known as uniformitarianism. Uniformitarianism is a big word that means simply this. The present is the key to the past. That things operate now as they have always operated.
Uniformitarianism is an assumption which is based on the lack of evidence to the contrary. For example, we assume that the speed of light and the force of gravity are the same throughout the universe because that is where all of the evidence points. We can't be 100% sure of this, but it would be absurd to assume differently, unless some compelling evidence for that came to light.
And the evolutionist looks at how some things are laying down layers, sees how it is sometimes a very slow process, and says if 1 inch of this soil is laid down over 10 years, then a foot of that soil must be laid down over, and you do the math.
I don't think we're in a position to be able to do any maths at this point, especially as Mr. Butt is so confused about the difference between evolution and geology. In order to be able to critique science effectively, you need to at least be up to speed on the basics.
And some of these layers, they would say, are multiplied millions of years old. They've got a problem when they say that.
Oh, really?
Sometimes we find fossils of like a fish or a plant or a whale that will cut through several layers. These are called polystrate fossils. Poly meaning many, straight or strata meaning fossils that go through many layers.
It's worth noting here that polystrate is a word which is used almost exclusively by young Earth creationists. Geologists refer to these as upright fossils, which are usually sections of tree trunk.
How in the world is a catfish going to stand on its tail for thousands or tens of thousands of years while these layers slowly build up around it?
That's not what happens. If a fossil is upright, it's usually due to rapid deposition of mud, sand or volcanic ash. The fact that there are layers indicates that the build-up of sediments is not a continual, uninterrupted process.
How in the world is a huge whale going to stand on its tail for hundreds or thousands or millions of years while layers build up around it. Is that a plausible explanation?
No. The whale fossil, which creationists refer to, is not upright. It's tilted at an angle of about 45 degrees, which happens to be the same angle as the sediment layers. Thanks to the movement of plate tectonics, what was once horizontal is now at an angle. My creationist friends, why do you think Mr. Butt fails to mention these additional details?
What happens to a whale when it stands on its tail for 1 year? It decays, it becomes almost unrecognizable as a whale. It certainly would never stand on its tail for 10 or 20 or 30,000 years while it is buried slowly over multiplied years. That's not plausible.
Of course it's not plausible. It's a straw man. It's not what the paleontologists found and reported.
Let me give you another example of how we know these layers were not laid down over multiplied millions of years.
Notice how he said, how we know, rather than what we believe. Remember that false certainty I mentioned earlier?
In the early 1980s, Mount St. Helens exploded. In that eruption, that volcanic eruption, a huge dam was formed. Several days and months after that, this dam broke and a huge mudslide proceeded to slide down the side of the mountain, a monumental, catastrophic mudslide in a single day.
And as we would expect from Mr. Butt by now, many important details are left out. He didn't mention that the composition of the material eroded was unconsolidated ash and pumice gravel, whereas the Grand Canyon is mainly solid rock. The difference would be like turning a fire hose onto a sand dune and comparing it with the effect it had on a cliff face. It goes without saying that the sand would erode away quicker than the cliff.
A cavern was carved out, a canyon was carved, that was almost exactly 1/40th to scale of the Grand Canyon in a single day. In fact, this canyon is known as the Little Grand Canyon. Well, how is it that in a single day you can look at this canyon and see multiplied layers that allegedly could be laid down over millions of years? But they weren't. They were laid down in a single catastrophe.
A volcanic eruption by its very nature can eject material in fits and starts. This is why we find ash, pumice and lava in separate layers in different locations. They are superficially similar in appearance to the sedimentary layers found in the Grand Canyon, but any serious amateur geologist can tell the difference between a sedimentary layer and a volcanic one.
Do you know of any catastrophe that could lay down layers like you see in the Grand Canyon on a larger scale than the eruption of Mount St. Helens? I do.
Careful now, Mr. Butt. It sounds like you are claiming to know things which you merely believe. Again.
One that you read about in the Bible, Noah's flood. The flood where the Bible says that the fountains of the deep broke open.
Fountains of the deep? Given what we know about gravity, hydrology and the volume of water on this planet, what exactly are fountains of the deep? I've never heard a good explanation of this from a creationist.
That would cause cataclysmic geological formation and reformation, several times larger than the eruption of Mount St. Helens.
Do I really need to point out that Mount St. Helens was a volcano, unlike Noah's flood? The Bible even says it was a flood. Not that that automatically means such an event happened in exactly the way biblical literalists believe it did.
A very plausible answer to many of the layers that we see.
Very plausible? According to who? Meteorologists? Biblical literalists? Geologists?
Well, the evolutionist says, well, we can prove that the geological column, the rocks, are multiplied billions of years old.
You mean geologists? Isn't that right, Mr. Butt?
Well, how can you do that? Sometimes people think that evolutionists use a dating method known as carbon-14 dating to give the millions of years of time that they need. That is simply not true.
Jolly good. At least that misconception isn't being promulgated here.
Carbon-14 dating cannot be used to date anything but once living material.
In other words, the sample being tested has to contain carbon.
And even the inventor of carbon-14 dating, W.F. Libby, said that it can only be used to date things in thousands of years.
You mean tens of thousands of years. Radiocarbon dating has been calibrated to an accuracy of plus or minus a couple of hundred years back to about 50,000 years. To put that into context, that's nearly 10 times further back than Mr. Butt thinks is the date of the supernatural creation of the universe.
And in fact, we have discovered that it doesn't really even work all that well for thousands of years.
Who is we?
Sometimes they would date using carbon-14 dating freshly killed seals that give dates of over 1,000 years, or a living mollusk that would give dates over 1,000 or 1,500 years. Sometimes they would date different particles of the same musk ox that would date 7,000 years differently.
Who is they? It would be really helpful for the curious young creationist who has forked out some of their hard-earned cash to buy this DVD if Mr. Butt was a little more specific when he makes these claims. Anyone who has a basic understanding of radiocarbon dating should know that it is useless for dating mollusks and other aquatic creatures who build their body parts from anything other than fresh plant material. When a plant dies, it no longer absorbs carbon from the atmosphere. So that is the point at which the radiometric clock is reset. Any aquatic creature which feeds off others in the food chain, which haven't absorbed their carbon from the atmosphere until the point of being eaten, is going to give a false reading. Once again, the scientists in these fields understand this and take it into account, unlike the young Earth creationists. As for the musk ox, there seems to be confusion about the dates. Some creationists claim 17,200 years, while others claim 7,200. Also, it's unclear whether they are referring to musk oxes or mammoths. I would hazard a guess that there was contamination in the samples.
So how is it that the evolutionists claim that they can get multiplied billions of years for Earth history? There is a new type of dating method that they would suggest to us proves this beyond the shadow of a doubt. Radiometric dating methods.
This is so wrong-headed it's hard to know how to untangle it. Firstly, radiocarbon dating is one form of radiometric dating, specifically the one which measures the quantity of carbon-14 in a sample. Secondly, radiometric dating cannot be newer. It would be like claiming that bookshelves are older than books. It's an absurdity.
They would say, yes, radiometric dating methods prove that the Earth is billions of years old. Now, like we said earlier, ironically, there have always been dating methods that have been suggested that prove the alleged age of the Earth, which do nothing of the sort.
Scientists give age estimates, not proof. Unlike religionists, scientists rarely claim absolute certainty. And if they do, they're doing it wrong.
But let's look at radiometric dating methods. They would say, yes, here's the process. Suppose you have a radioactive element like uranium. It breaks down into a daughter element like lead. The parent element being uranium, the daughter element being lead.
Once again, Mr. Butt is drastically oversimplifying the science. It only applies to the isotopes of uranium-238 and 235, which decay into lead-206 and 207 respectively, involving a combination of alpha and beta decays. But for now, I will let Mr. Butt dig himself into an even deeper hole of ignorance.
Suppose you have 50 ounces of uranium. Its half-life, that means the amount of time it's going to take half of that uranium to break down into lead, is supposed to be 4.5 billion years or so.
That's only uranium-238. Uranium-235 has a half-life of 704 million years. The neat thing is that this allows the scientists to calibrate their methods and easily spot contaminated samples. Something else which Mr. Butt doesn't mention is that most of the data is collected from zircon crystals within rocks, which have their radiometric clocks reset when they solidify from a molten state. Any lead is rejected at that point and can only build up within the crystal after they have solidified, as the aforementioned isotopes of uranium decay.
So you've got 50 ounces of uranium, half-life at 4.5 billion years. So in 4.5 billion years, that 50 ounces of uranium is going to have broken down into 25 ounces of uranium and 25 ounces of lead, approximately. So if you find a rock that contains 25 ounces of uranium and 25 ounces of lead, then you can calculate that that rock is how old? Well, the evolutionists would suggest to us you can calculate that that rock is 4.5 billion years old or so, give or take some technical stipulation.
That would be more or less accurate if he was only referring to uranium-238, but he doesn't even mention such trifling details. Nor does he seem to understand that it would be a geologist who conducts such tests, not an evolutionist.
What's the problem with that? The problem with that is it's based on several assumptions that you simply cannot grant the evolutionist. Assumption number one, no daughter element was in the rock to start with.
Yes, you can. It's not possible for a zircon crystal to solidify with any lead in it at all. Scientists understand this, which is why uranium-lead dating methods are taken seriously by the scientific community.
Oh, you see, what if there was some of that lead in the rock to start with? What if 22 or 23 ounces of lead was in that rock to start with? Would that skew your dates a little bit? Let's illustrate. Suppose you walk up to someone's pool and you see that it's a 3,000-gallon pool. They are running a hose pipe into it, and that hose pipe is pumping 10 gallons an hour. You do some math there. It's a 3,000-gallon pool pumping 10 gallons an hour. Then it's obviously been pumping for 30 hours or so. Actually, what would it be? 300 hours or so, rather. So you knock on the door. You say, "Hello, friend. I have done some calculations. I see that you've been running your hose pipe for 300 hours. They say, "Oh, no, we haven't been doing that. Last night it was a torrential downpour, and it filled our entire pool up, all except 10 gallons.
Wow. That must have had something to do with the fountains of the deep. Or maybe God forgot to close a window in the firmament.
We've only been running our hose pipe for an hour. Now, your calculations are off just a little bit, aren't they? Because you assumed that there was no water in that pool to begin with. And that was a faulty assumption.
Who assumed that exactly? Is it not more reasonable to assume that the neighbour was topping his pool up rather than filling it from empty? Would a neighbour who is that nosy not notice something like that?
Is it the case that there could be some lead in the rock before that element started breaking down, uranium started breaking down? Sure, certainly could.
No, it couldn't. What is it with people who are ignorant of the scientists who claim to know better than the experts?
Assumption number two. Nothing has touched that rock. Nothing has seeped in or crept out of it in the 4.5 billion year history that it's supposed to have had. That is a very serious assumption. Could some water have leaked into that rock and added some lead? Sure.
No. Zircon crystals are not water-soluble, and their crystallizing temperature, below which lead cannot escape the crystal lattice, is about 1,000 degrees Celsius. So if the sample has been heated to that temperature or above, and then recrystallized, the scientists can tell when that happened. That's the whole point. They can tell how long it has been since the rock sample and the zircon crystals within it were last molten.
Could some water have leaked into that rock and taken some lead or some uranium away? Sure.
Mr. Butt clearly has no clue about the properties of zircon crystals. within rock samples. It takes patience and effort to learn how the science works. Any idiot can throw mud at it.
What has happened to a rock in 4.5 billion years? Who knows? We can't prove that there is a rock that old, but if there were a rock that old, all kinds of things would happen to that rock. You cannot grant the assumption that nothing has happened to that rock to take parent or daughter element in or out of it in 4.5 billion years.
Yes, you can. But you need to understand what radioactive decay is and how isotopes of specific elements can be locked into crystalline structures.
Assumption number 3. The rate of decay of uranium to lead has always been the same. Now, suppose that we look at that idea and we say, yeah, we assume that the rate's always been the same.
We have no reason to assume otherwise. The half-lives of unstable isotopes has never been shown to change when subjected to extreme temperatures, pressures, or strong gravity. Here comes another childlike analogy, much like the hosepipe topping up the swimming pool.
What's going to happen if you make that type of assumption? Suppose you go out into the woods and you see a man chopping wood.
I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. I sleep all night and I work all day.
And you see that he has chopped down 25 trees, and you see that it takes him an hour to chop down a single tree. And you say, sir, I see you've been chopping down a tree for a single hour. It took you 1 hour to chop down one tree. There are 25 trees on the ground. I am going to assume that you've been chopping 25 hours. He says, oh, no. He says, earlier today, when my belly was full and my axe was sharp, I was chopping down 6 trees an hour. Just in this last hour have I only been chopping down one tree. Oh, well, so then our calculation is off by 20 hours or so because we had the faulty assumption that the rate has always been the same.
Half-lives and radioactive decay are not analogous to everyday phenomena such as chopping down trees or drinking tea. We don't have to go far back in history to a time when nobody knew what carbon dioxide was, or that plants absorb the carbon and turn it into the food we eat and the wood we use to make things out of. Many scientific discoveries are counterintuitive, which is why those who haven't done their homework, Mr. Butt, should refrain from criticizing it.
If you allow the evolutionists to use those assumptions,
the scientifically derived understanding of how the natural world works is not determined by whether young Earth creationists allow reasonable assumptions to be made or not.
Then if you use the same assumptions on other dating methods, like the decay of the Earth's magnetic field, or the ratio of helium and hydrogen in the atmosphere, if you get to use those same assumptions, you will see that you can get a very young Earth using those assumptions. They simply cannot be granted to the evolutionists because they are assumptions that are not proven.
Thanks to our understanding of plate tectonics, we can be reasonably certain that the Earth's magnetic field changes and flips over long periods of time. The data is locked in the rocks of the ocean floor, which happen to be spreading at a rate comparable to how fast your fingernails grow. This can be cross-calibrated by testing the sea-floor basalt radiometrically, and what do you know? The age estimates correlate.
So how old is the Earth? Well, I'm here to tell you that I can tell you exactly how old the Earth is.
Don't you mean you can tell us how old you believe it is?
Oh, would you like a number as to how old the Earth is? Oh, I'm sorry, I don't think I can give you an exact number. But I can tell you that the Bible tells you how old the Earth is. The Bible says in Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the seas, and all that is in them." It's very self-explanatory.
It's only self-explanatory if you assume that the 66-book Protestant Bible is inerrant, regardless of how many contradictions are pointed out to you, such as, how many sons did Abraham have?
What does that leave out? The heavens, the earth, the seas, all that is in them? Does that leave anything out? No, it doesn't. In fact, that includes everything. Well, so we've got 6 days where the Lord made everything.
Assuming, of course, that there's nothing symbolic or allegorical about the Genesis creation stories. While I'm at it, there are even contradictions within the first 2 chapters of Genesis. In Genesis 1, God creates the animals first, and then male and female humans. According to Genesis 2, he creates the man first, then he creates the animals, which the man has to name, and then he creates the first female human. Question: in which order were these things created, according to that supposedly inerrant book?
The Bible also says that in Mark chapter 10, verse 6, in the beginning, God created them, male and female, talking about humans. So in the beginning, God created humans, male and female, the beginning of creation. When you look back in Genesis chapter 1, you see that God created humans on day 6.
And if we now turn our Bibles to Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, it says that God created the heavens and the earth in a day. Singular, not plural. I've touched on the whole yom business before. Is it not obvious that the Hebrew word for day can mean more than one thing, more than a literal 24-hour day?
How old is the earth? Oh, that's easy. It's exactly 5 days older than humans.
According to certain biblical literalists, millions of Bible-believing Christians don't interpret it that way.
But I guess that's not really what you were wanting, was it? You were wanting more of a number. Well, I think I can give you a little bit more of a number. If you were to take the time that we have been on this earth and try to get back to the time that Jesus was on this earth, how many years would that be? That's pretty simple. The year now is about 2007 AD. That's the year. It's actually January, just turned that. About how long has it been from us to Jesus? About 2,000 years. Secular history will give us that. We are in the year 2007 AD, Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord. That's pretty self-explanatory, pretty easy to understand. Well, how long was it from Jesus to Abraham? Secular history and everybody involved will tell you that that was about 2,000 years. Everybody understands that. It's not a number that's even up for much debate at all. So from us to Jesus, about 2,000 years. From Jesus to Abraham, about 2,000 years.
Meanwhile, we have to keep assuming that the Bible is what biblical literalists claim it is. There is dispute about whether Jesus was more than a human being, and even whether he was a historical character. The calendar we use today was put in place by humans, so it's hardly surprising that the starting point would coincide with what they believe to be a significant event. As for Abraham being a real character, as depicted by the 3 main monotheistic religions, that's even less certain.
So we just have one more piece of the puzzle.
There's only one more piece, if you've already assumed your conclusion.
How long was it from Abraham to Adam?
What if there was no Adam? What if the idea of the first 2 humans is a just so story, or a parable? The scientific evidence points to there being a significant population of humans all around the Mediterranean 6,000 years ago. Read up on your anthropology, Mr. Butt.
Did you know that in the Bible, in Genesis chapter 5 and Genesis chapter 11, the Bible gives us genealogies. Genealogies that tell us the age of the father when they had their son.
Why do I get the impression that Mr. Butt's target audience has never read what is supposed to be, for them, the most important book in the world?
And Adam was 130 years and he begot Seth. And Seth was, and it goes down and tells us. And you know what you can do? You can take that 130 years that Adam lived before he had his son.
Hold on a second. The oldest verified person in history was a French lady who died at the age of 122. Just because the Bible tells stories of people living for hundreds of years doesn't mean it's literally true. If Methuselah had been born in the year of the Battle of Hastings, 1066, he would still be alive today. Just think about that for a moment.
And add it to the age that the son was before he had his next son, and that son was before he had his next son, and you can get a very good concept of how long it was from Abraham to Adam.
I think we can get an even better idea of how the mind of a biblical literalist works.
Now, from Jesus to Abraham, there were about 55 generations, and those 55 generations composed about 2,000 years. From Abraham to Adam, there were only about 20 generations.
Yes, that's what the stories say. And you believe it?
And those 20 generations composed about 2,000 years.
Well, what do you know? That sure sounds plausible to me.
Well, you say, why were there 55 generations between Jesus and Abraham, and those 55 composed 2,000 years, but there were only 20 generations between Abraham and Adam, and those 20 composed 2,000 years? Why such a big difference?
Because it's a story.
Think about that just for a second. The ages of the patriarchs in Adam's time. Adam living to be over 900. Methuselah living to be 969. It makes perfect sense, the abbreviated number of generations, because of their long time spans.
Oh well, I'm glad you cleared that one up. There was me thinking I would have to abandon my understanding of the aging process.
And when we look in the New Testament, we look in Jude 14. Jude 14 says, "Now Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied." And tells you what Enoch prophesied. Did you know when you look back in Genesis and you look at Enoch and you count down how many he was from Adam, guess where he was? The seventh from Adam. New Testament commentary showing us that we know that there were no gaps in the first 7 for sure. That only leaves you 13 generations.
This quote is problematic for Christian fundamentalists because Jude is quoting from the first book of Enoch, which was rejected from the Protestant so-called inerrant 66-book canon. If the book of Enoch was good enough for Jude, why did the Christian compilers of the biblical canon reject it? Furthermore, if a collection of books is internally consistent, that does not automatically mean that all of it is true. Tom Sawyer is internally consistent, yet nobody argues that it is non-fiction.
Suppose you wanted to try to put humans on this earth for 3.5 million years. Do you know how many years you're going to have to put in between those gaps of the 13 generations? About 270,000 years. And that's only going to give you a number of 3.5 million. That's not going to get you anywhere close to the multiplied millions or billions that the evolutionists need.
You're missing the point that critical scientists and historians do not believe in a literal Adam or an accurate biblical genealogy, and that includes many Bible-believing Christians.
Oh no.
Oh yes.
Oh no.
Oh yes.
Oh no.
It really does, I'm telling you.
Oh no. No, the Bible makes it clear that humans have been on this earth from the very beginning. Only 5 days separate the creation of humanity from the beginning of the universe.
Why can't these hardcore biblical literalists comprehend the idea that their holy book might not be 100% factually and historically accurate?
How long have humans been here? There is another clear picture that from Adam to Abraham, about 2,000 years. From Abraham to Jesus, about 2,000 years. And from Jesus to us, about 2,000 years.
And if you believe that, you might want to do a little investigation into this newfangled thing called critical thinking.
Everything that we know as factual information, scientifically and biblically, fits into this framework.
If this is the kind of propaganda which is being fed to the young and impressionable, is it any wonder that we have a problem with scientific literacy?
How old is the earth? The Bible is clear. There are not, multiply millions or billions of years of earth history, there are only a few thousand.
If the Bible is as clear as you claim it is, Mr. Butt, how come there are millions of Christians and Jews who interpret Genesis 1 differently from you and have no problem with the scientifically derived age of the earth and universe?
Thank you for being with us this lesson. I look forward to studying more about God, His Word, and His world throughout the remaining lessons.
I would be lying if I said it was a pleasure. It was actually quite painful at times. If any of my religious friends have made it this far, please understand that I'm not trying to disprove the existence of your God. I'm defending science and reason against those who seek to undermine it with misinformation. Normally, I don't do the whole please like, subscribe and share thing, but I would appreciate it if this rebuttal of Kyle Butt found its way onto the social media pages of some young Earth creationists. They need to understand that they are being taken for a ride.